In today's video, we're delving into two serial killer cases where ritual and signatures were used in disturbing ways. Two men, two different continents, two very different lives. One built a respected youth organization inside the Soviet Union, a trusted mentor, a civic leader, a man praised for discipline and patriotism. The other lived quietly in suburban Missouri, polite, forgettable, almost invisible. But behind closed doors, both were building something far darker. Torture rooms designed for complete control, cameras positioned with intent, rituals refined through repetition. Not crimes of impulse, but crimes of reconstruction and preservation. Today we're examining Anatoly Slivko and Maury Travis, two offenders driven not just by violence, but by ritual, by fixation, by the need to replay a moment until it matched the fantasy in their minds. This isn't just about what they did, it's about why they needed to do it again and again. Alright, welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, a big warm welcome from Ireland. If you're a returning viewer, you know what to expect in these videos, so buckle up now. I'm learning the hard way that the YouTube algorithms aren't the biggest fans of true crime, so I want to state here from the get-go that these videos are for educational purposes only and that viewer discretion is highly advised. I see that 86% that watch the videos aren't subscribed, so if you're one of them, hit the sub button now so you never miss one of these videos. Also share your thoughts in the comments, let us know where you're watching from. I enjoy reading the comments, hearing some feedback, seeing which cases you want to go through next. So I'm going to stop yabbering on here now. Let's get straight into the video. In a small Soviet town, a decorated youth leader built his reputation on discipline and trust. He organised hiking trips, mentored boys, filmed patriotic documentaries. Parents trusted him with their sons. Authorities praised him. What they didn't know was that he was running disturbing experiments on the town youth. For more than 20 years, he repeated the same ritualized act, binding boys, hanging them, and filming the results. Not for notoriety, but to recreate a single disturbing image burned into his mind in 1960. His name was Anatoly Slivko, the honoured torturer. Anatoly Slivko was born on December 28, 1938 in Izerbash, a relatively new oil settlement on the Caspian Sea that had been established only a few years earlier. He entered the world during one of the harshest periods in Soviet history, amid the aftershocks of Stalin's forced collectivization policies and on the brink of World War II. Poverty, instability and fear were woven into the fabric of daily life. Anatoly was the eldest of two children. His father struggled with alcoholism and frequently argued with his mother, creating a tense and volatile home environment. Though reportedly intelligent, Slivko was described as withdrawn, performing poorly in school and suffering from reoccurring health issues. His lack of commitment to his studies and propensity to daydream in class resulted in average to poor grades. His dark fantasy life was already starting to take hold of his young mind. His childhood unfolded against the backdrop of wartime trauma. In 1943, with his father away fighting for the Red Army, Slivko witnessed many atrocities committed by the Nazis. He routinely saw dead bodies and animals littered along the landscape. In one incident, he hid in a cemetery with 4 other children to escape German bombing raids, only to be pushed aside by these children who were repulsed by his emaciated appearance. According to Slivko, as he crouched into a ball, he observed the mutilated remains of a woman and a horse strewn across the nearby street. These images left a mark in his young mind. As he entered adolescence, he became aware of his homosexuality, something that, in the repressive climate of mid-20th century Soviet society, carried immense stigma and danger. He also experienced erectile dysfunction, which compounded his feelings of shame and inadequacy. These factors, combined with earlier trauma and social isolation, formed part of the psychological landscape that would later emerge in disturbing ways. After finishing school, Slivko attempted to gain admission to the Moscow State University but failed the entrance exam. Soon after, he entered the Soviet Army for compulsory service and was sent to the Soviet Far East. His military experience was marked by ridicule from fellow servicemen who mocked his timid nature. He was ultimately discharged and described as incompatible with military life. In 1961, he returned home. That same year, his younger half-sister introduced him to Lyudmila, a woman who would become his wife. Their marriage, by all outward appearances, was stable. They had 2 children, but according to later accounts, their relationship was strained by Slivko's ongoing sexual dysfunction, and the intimacy between them was limited before eventually ceasing altogether. He reportedly sought medical help at one point and was humiliated when a nurse mocked him, an incident that deepened his sense of shame. Publicly, however, the Slivko family were viewed as respectable and very civic-minded. Also, in 1961, Slivko witnessed a traumatic event that he would later describe as pivotal. A drunk driver veered into a group of pedestrians, fatally striking a teenage boy who was wearing the uniform of the Young Pioneers, the Soviet youth organization comparable to the Boy Scouts. Slivko later claimed that for reasons he did not fully understand, he experienced sexual arousal and an intense orgasm at the scene, an orgasm triggered by the image of the dying boy and even the smell of burning fuel. The moment fused trauma and arousal in his mind. Having just ejaculated, Slivko walked approximately 20 yards towards a nearby bus shelter, where he sat and continued to stare at the teenager's deceased corpse, who remained crushed beneath the motorcycle as emergency services arrived at the scene. According to Slivko, he experienced elation and a sense of empowerment as he sat and contemplated the suffering the teenager had endured before his death. Here are Slivko's own words about the incident. The boy had experienced convulsions in the death throes as the smell of gasoline and fire permeated the air. The boy looked so helpless, especially in uniform. It reminded me of how I felt inside myself after a childhood of pain and suffering. Each time he cried out in agony, I became more excited. By the time of the boy's death, I became oblivious to everyone else apart from the boy. In the years that followed, this memory became central to his internal fantasy life. Elements of the boy's clothing, particularly the uniform, and a developing fixation on footwear would later surface in his crimes. At some point in the mid-1960s, Slivko established a youth club, positioning himself as a mentor for local boys. The first club was destroyed in a fire, but in 1966 he founded a second organisation called Churgid. Through this club he gained local recognition and respect, producing amateur documentary-style films about German wartime atrocities and earning a reputation as a dedicated youth leader, all while privately nurturing fantasies rooted in that earlier traffic incident. Between 1964 and 1985, Slivko murdered at least 7 boys. He would select them from his youth club, often vulnerable, trusting and accustomed to his authority. He would invite them to participate in what he framed as training exercises and experiments that would stretch their spine and make them grow taller. He warned them that they might lose consciousness briefly, but assured them he would revive them safely. Framed as scientific and beneficial, the setup relied on his authority and the trust he had cultivated with the boys. Prior to each boy undertaking this experiment, Slivko would harmlessly rehearse the hanging scene with his intended victim in order to gain his confidence. He would then purchase a new uniform for the victim to wear and shine his shoes before enacting the hanging. In addition, to prevent any vomiting, the victim was required not to eat for several hours before the experiment took place. When the time came, Slivko would bind and suspend his victims by hanging until they passed out. Once unconscious, he would then strip them and arrange the body in suggestive positions, masturbating frequently onto their shoes. This entire process was filmed by Slivko and retained to fuel his erotic fantasies. He typically kept the victim's shoes as a memento, as well as the photographs and films which he later developed in a home laboratory. Slivko also meticulously recorded details of each hanging in his diaries. The shoes, the pictures, the films all served as stimuli for Slivko's masturbatory fantasies for months or years until the urge for fresher stimuli consumed him and the urge to kill grew larger. It's important to note that many of the boys survived and returned to their normal lives, unaware of the full extent of what had happened to them while they were unconscious. In at least 7 of the cases, however, Slivko failed to revive his victims. When that happened, he dismembered their bodies and burned their remains using gasoline in an attempt to destroy the evidence, and also to remind himself of the traffic incident which had sparked his initial arousal, the incident which first stirred his urge from the darkness of his psyche. After his first fatal victim died in 1964, Slivko destroyed the recordings out of panic, but he preserved the footage from later killings, keeping them as personal mementos, a macabre documentation of the ritual he continued to reenact over the years. He later admitted in an interview that the first kill triggered a greater sense of arousal within him. It was here his ritual had graduated to the murderous stage. Slivko operated for more than 2 decades until November 1985, when the prosecutor, Tamara Langiova, who was investigating the disappearance of Slivko's final victim, Sergei Pavlov, decided to take a look into Slivko and his club after she learned that Pavlov had told a neighbour that he was going to meet the leader of Shergid before he went missing. Tamara found nothing illegal about the way the club operated, but suspicions grew when several boys who had been to the club declared that they had suffered temporary amnesia after Slivko performed experiments on them. The next month, authorities searched his property and found the recordings along with reams of other evidence. Slivko was arrested at his home and formally charged with 7 counts of murder, sexual abuse and necrophilia. He ultimately confessed to his crimes, and between January and February 1986, he led investigators to the whereabouts of 6 bodies, but he was unable to find the body of his first kill. In June, he was sentenced to death and imprisoned, where he would later remain on death row for 3 years. Slivko's case is one of the clearest examples of ritual dominating the crime. He wasn't driven by a lust to kill. He was reconstructing a single moment, the image of a teenage boy killed in a traffic accident decades earlier. The victim he witnessed had worn a young pioneer uniform, so Slivko dressed his victims in fresh uniforms and paid attention to shining their shoes. He staged the hanging to mirror the writhing posture of the burning body he remembered. Even the sensory details mattered to Slivko. The original scene had been marked by the smell of burning gasoline. Later, when disposing of bodies, Slivko used fuel to burn the remains, reintroducing the scent tied to that formative memory. The camera was not incidental either. It was a central component to the ritual. He filmed each reenactment so he could replay it, study it, and refine it. The recordings became an archive of repetition, not for murder, but essential for sustaining the ritual. Psychiatric assessments later indicated that Slivko described dissatisfaction when the reenactment didn't match the original memory closely enough. That dissatisfaction drove repetition and refinement in the most grisly of ways. Slivko's case strips ritual murder down to its psychological core. He built a reenactment machine, and in doing so, he reveals something deeply unsettling about ritualistic violence. Sometimes it isn't driven by bloodlust or desire. Sometimes it's rooted in fixation, an obsession with a single formative moment. A moment that fused power, fear, and control into euphoria. A moment that never stopped replaying. Each crime became an attempt to step back inside it, to capture, even briefly, the feeling it first produced. In 2002, a St. Louis news reporter received a letter. Inside was a map, a precise set of directions marked with an X. That X led to a body. The writer claimed he had killed multiple women. He described binding them, holding them captive, recording them, and watching them die. When investigators traced the letter back to its source, it led them to a quiet house in Ferguson, Missouri. Inside the house, investigators found a basement with a locked room, but it was no ordinary room. It was a torture chamber filled with videotapes. The man who sent the letter was named Maury Travis. He wasn't just killing women, he was documenting it. Maury Travis was born on October 25th, 1965 in St. Louis, Missouri, to Michael and Sandra Travis. He spent his early childhood in Carr Square Village, a public housing complex north of downtown St. Louis. It was a working-class neighbourhood marked by economic strain and rising urban tension during the late 1960s and 70s. By most accounts, his family were not outwardly chaotic or abusive. They were a black family navigating upward mobility in a city already divided along racial and class lines. At around age 10, Travis' parents moved him to Ferguson, Missouri, purchasing a modest ranch-style house on Ford Drive. Neighbours would later describe young Maury Travis as quiet and largely forgettable, a boy who kept to himself, occasionally rode his bike, maybe mowed a lawn or two, but never drew attention. He appeared withdrawn rather than disruptive. In the late 1970s, his parents separated. From here, his father receded from his life, and Travis remained with his mother, who worked long hours and maintained a structured household. Teachers described her as involved and strict, but appropriate during parent-teacher meetings. There were no documented reports of abuse, no juvenile record of violence, and no known psychiatric hospitalizations during Travis's childhood. Classmates described him as shy and awkward. If turmoil existed internally, it did not surface in official records. However, Travis would later claim that he felt sick in the head since around age 14, stating that he never felt normal or happy. After high school, he briefly attended Morris Brown College before returning to Missouri. Throughout early adulthood, he drifted through relatively low-profile employment and remained socially quiet and difficult to read. Those who knew him described him as polite but distant. His colleagues regarded him as being an advocate against drugs and frequently talked about auto mechanics with them. In the late 1980s, despite his lip service against drug use, Travis developed a cocaine addiction. By 1987 and 88, financial strain linked to his drug use contributed to a series of non-violent robberies, often targeting shoe stores. He was arrested in January 1989 and sentenced to 15 years in prison. He served approximately 5 years before being paroled in 1994. Prison records described him as a model inmate with no significant violent infractions. After release, Travis returned to Ferguson and worked as a waiter at a restaurant in St. Louis. Much like his former classmates and peers, his co-workers remembered him as professional and quiet, though internally, dark urges had begun to fester. He was arrested for cocaine possession in 1998 and for driving while intoxicated in 1999, but continued to maintain an outwardly stable, low profile. Across childhood and early adulthood, there were no publicly documented indicators of extreme violence that would later emerge. To most observers, he appeared unremarkable, socially reserved, and largely invisible. Between July 2000 and May 2002, women began disappearing across St. Louis and the rural corridor stretching into Illinois. The women were African American, many struggled with addiction, and many worked the streets and lived on the margins of society. Their bodies started turning up along highways, near on-ramps, in wooded clearings just far enough from the road to be missed. Most had been strangled. At first, the deaths didn't register as connected. Different jurisdictions, different dump sites, another tragic headline in areas already burdened by violence. There was no obvious signature beyond strangulation and roadside disposal, but there was a pattern. Travis lured the women to his home with promises of money. Once inside, he led them to his basement, where they were restrained with rope, chains, or electrical cords. He beat them, tortured them, raped them, and then recorded it, preserving the violence to revisit later. The basement is not without note. It was constructed for this purpose, a sealed environment where windows were blocked and sounds were contained. Victims were kept alive for extended periods, their fear prolonged, their captivity documented. When he was finished, their bodies were dumped without the slightest hint of remorse. Mary Shields was found in July 2000, wrapped in a trash bag in East St. Louis. Alicia Greenway's body was discovered in April 2001 near Interstate 64. 19-year-old Cassandra Walker was found in March 2001, and investigators later believed she appeared on one of the videotapes recovered from his basement. Teresa Wilson's body was located along Highway 67 in May 2001. Betty James and Verona Thompson were also found in 2001, both strangled and left along similar corridors. Yvonne Cruz's case became pivotal when DNA evidence later matched Travis. Brenda Beasley was likewise linked through DNA and videotape evidence discovered in his home. Around this same time, St. Louis reporter Bill Smith had been covering the string of murders, including a detailed life story on Teresa Wilson. In May 2002, Smith received an anonymous letter demanding he continue writing about the victims if he wanted confessions to additional killings. Enclosed within the letter was a printed map marked with an X. The map led investigators to human remains, the bones of a woman who has never been identified. In the letter, the writer claimed she was the 17th victim. The return address read only I Thraldom, the name of a bondage website. Investigators traced the map to Expedia.com. With the FBI now involved, authorities subpoenaed records from users who had generated that specific map between May 18th, the date Wilson's article ran, and May 21st, the postmark date on the letter. Only one IP address matched the search. It belonged to Maury Travis. When police arrested him at his Ferguson home, he acknowledged that he knew why they were there. A search of his basement uncovered extensive bloodstains, bondage restraints, weapons including a stun gun, newspaper clippings about the murders, and numerous videotapes showing women held captive, tortured, and killed on camera. During questioning, investigators collected a soda can Travis had used. DNA from that can matched semen recovered in rape examinations connected to Yvonne Cruz and Brenda Beasley, both murdered in 2001. Another victim, Betty James, was identified through footage recovered from the tapes and physical evidence linking Travis' vehicle to her body. Authorities in Atlanta also expressed interest in questioning Travis regarding 6 unsolved murders from 1994 when he had been living in the area, but that questioning would never come to pass. Travis faced federal charges and was placed in county jail on June 10, 2002, 3 days after his arrest. When guards missed 2 consecutive checks, he was found hanging in his prison cell from his bedding. Maury Travis's crimes were not impulsive. They were structured. At the center of his ritual was control, not just over the victim's body, but over space, time, and memory. The basement is also core to his ritual. Once a woman crossed that threshold, the outside world disappeared. Inside his torture room, Travis controlled lighting, movement, and even time itself. The space functioned as a private stage, a controlled arena where domination could unfold without interruption. That control extended beyond the physical moment, as the camera was almost always present. Recording was not an afterthought, it was integral to the ritual. By filming the assaults, Travis preserved the experience. The act did not end with death. It became permanent, replayable. The violence could be revisited long after the body had been discarded. In psychological terms, this is ritual reinforcement, extending the emotional payoff beyond the crime itself. The tape suggests something else also. Humiliation was deliberate. Victims were restrained, forced to speak, forced to plead for their lives. Their fear was documented. The degradation wasn't collateral, it was central. Psychological domination mattered as much as the physical restraint. And then there was the escalation. For nearly 2 years, the ritual remained private, contained within his basement walls and hidden on videotapes. But the letter to the reporter changed that. Mailing the map marked a psychological shift. Travis didn't just want to control his victims, he wanted to control the narrative. The map was proof that he could kill across jurisdictions without detection, proof that he could taunt law enforcement, proof that he decided when the story moved forward. In many serial cases, ritual is about repetition. In Travis's case, it was about preservation and authorship. He built a room to control the act. He used a camera to preserve the act. And finally, he used a letter to direct how the act would be discovered. Control is the core of his signature, the very nervous system of the ritual. And when arrest stripped that control away, he reclaimed it one final time, ending his life before a trial could take it from him. Made it this far, thanks so much for watching. I want to get a quick plug in myself for a book I wrote. If you're interested in serial killers and want to read more, want to read a fiction book, My thriller is out now. You can get it on Amazon. I'll give you the quick elevator pitch. Detective Eve Salanga unknowingly falls in love with the serial killer she's trying to catch, and what ensues is a lot of gaslighting, a lot of murder, and a huge twist at the end. Check it out if you like it. I'll link it down in the comments below. Thanks so much again for watching.